I just got exercise 7 pulled up here, and we are going to walk through it together. I apologize if it's a lot of me just reading the screen to you, just so that I can make sure I'm getting all the instructions, tips, all that stuff on the recording, as well as just here in our live demonstration together. If you want to follow along, I've got the exercise 7 module opened up in Canvas, and today we are actually not going to start with a blank SketchUp file, but I have one already started for you. So you just need to hit the little download button that's right next to this toolsreview.skp. So you can just hit that download button, and then you can open the file. And SketchUp should pop up, and you should be seeing something with a bunch of boxes and some random lines and surfaces. So, go back to the assignment. What we're going to do is kind of test out our different tools within each of these boxes. And so I've given you instructions for what to do with the objects that are inside of each box. And so the Canvas assignment should just walk right through. It says in box 1 do this, box 2 do this. So let's go back to the Canvas assignment. The first thing I wrote down is not anything to do, but just some refreshers on what your mouse can actually do for you. So the mouse itself is a tool. You can use the scroll wheel in the middle to zoom in and out. So just scroll forward to come in, scroll back to come out. I think I also have written in there that you can push and hold your scroll tool, and the orbit tool automatically will be activated, so then you can orbit around that way. Of course, you can also come up to your toolbar and click the orbit tool, but sometimes it's a little bit quicker to just press and hold that scroll wheel. And then the last one that I have on here is to pan, which basically just means you can move left to right, up and down. You're still pressing and holding your scroll wheel, and then you're also going to hit Shift at the same time. And that will bring this little hand, and now you just pan around rather than orbiting if you did not hold down the Shift key. And again, pan is in your toolbar, so if you prefer to use it that way, you can just click on it and use your left clicker to use it. But again, just a little bit quicker sometimes to use your mouse. So let's get into each of our tools. So to do this assignment, you're probably going to want both the Canvas module pulled up maybe on one screen and then maybe your SketchUp on the other screen, so that you can follow along with each of the instructions. So again, apologize if I'm just kind of reading a lot to you, but trying to get as much information as I can about what each of the tools do. So the first one that we're going to review is ways to select and deselect objects. There are a lot of ways that you can do this, and I'm actually going to split my screen as well so that I can be looking at the instructions while I've got SketchUp pulled up. Might make SketchUp just a little bit bigger. What's that? Okay, so I'm going to scroll over here to box number 1. And what we have over here is ways to select and deselect. So I've listed out 7 different ways that you can select and deselect objects in SketchUp. The first one that I have listed is to hold the Shift key to activate both your select and deselect. So if I'm on my select tool, which is the one that looks like the little cursor here, if I press and hold the Shift key, you should see a little plus and minus come right next to your cursor. And that means that you can both select and deselect objects. And so then I can just start clicking around to each object. And as I click new ones, they turn blue so that they are selected. And then I'm still holding the Shift key. I can click on those same blue lines to deselect them. And they'll go away. If I only want to be able to select tools, not deselect tools, I can still be on my select tool, but this time instead of Shift, I hit the Control key, and I'm press and hold the Control key, and now you'll see just a little plus sign next to your cursor. And this means that I can now individually select objects, and they'll only add objects to my selection. It won't subtract objects from my selection. The reverse of that would be to hold both the Shift and Control keys, and you'll see a little minus sign next to your cursor, and this means that I can only deselect things. So right now I have nothing selected, and I can't keep selecting more items because I just have the deselect tool activated. Our next one is that you can click and drag from the top left corner, and this will select objects that are fully within that selection rectangle. So if I just start from my top left corner and I click and drag, you can see how there's a selection box that's forming. So if I'm clicking from the top left, only objects that are completely within that selection box are going to be selected. So if I come closer to my rectangle here, I start from the top left and come down, you'll see that only these lines that were fully within that selection rectangle are selected. The other items that were maybe just touching the selection box a little bit are not going to be selected. Kind of opposite of that, if I start from the bottom right corner, this is going to select everything that your selection box touches. So same thing, but dragging from the bottom left, or I'm sorry, the bottom right, and coming up. Anything that even barely touches my selection box is going to get selected. So you see that my selection box really only grabbed this small corner of my rectangle, but everything that was kind of touching that selection box will be selected. The sixth one, you can double click a surface to select the surface and all of its bounding lines. So let's take this surface for example. If I click on it once, it's going to just activate the surface that I've selected. If I double click, it will select the surface plus all of these bounding lines. And if I triple click, it's going to select all adjacent objects, anything that's touching my surface. So your kind of assignment for box 1 here is just to try out each of these methods. And I've also added as a reminder that the shortcut or the hotkey for the select tool is just the space bar. So let's say I have my move tool activated, I can just hit the space bar and it takes me back to that select tool. Let's move on to box number 2. And this is where we're going to get into moving objects and using our move tool. So I say select your objects and choose the move tool or type M, that's your shortcut for your hotkey, to activate the move tool. You'll click once to choose a starting point, and then from there you can either type the measurement that you want to move your object by and hit enter, or you can just click a finish point. So I'll demonstrate both of those here. With this line here, I have selected it, and I'm going to choose the M key for move, and you can click anywhere to start moving the line, but I like to choose kind of an endpoint or a midpoint, something that's a little bit more known so that it's easier for me to choose a specified finish point. And for example, if I just start somewhere out here in random space and I want to move my line up to this top right corner, that's going to be really hard for me to get it to line up because my cursor is not on the line. So instead, I like to grab one of the endpoints of my object, and you'll see that SketchUp has highlighted the endpoint for you. And then I click once, and then I can easily grab my specific destination point. And then I click again to release. And then if we were to go the measurement route, same thing, you click once to grab the object, and then you will just type the number of the measurement that you want to move by and hit enter. So in our exercise here, we want to move the line in box 2 6 inches to the right. And so remember that SketchUp's default unit is inches. So to move 6 inches, you can simply type 6. But if you want to move in feet, you'll need to actually type in the units. So here I've got my line selected. I can type 6 and enter, and it should have moved by 6 inches. Alternatively, if I wanted to move it 1 foot, I would need to grab my object. I can type 12 for 12 inches, or I need to type 1 foot and enter, and it'll move by 1 foot. Let's move on to box number 3. And this is for copying an object. So you can select your objects and choose the Move tool or type M, so it's the same thing we just did. We're using the Move tool. And then you will click the Control key to activate the copy function. And then from there, it's pretty much the same as the Move tool. You'll click your starting point, use a measurement, and hit enter, or just choose a finish point. So it's the same exact process, but this time we're just going to make sure that the Control key is enabled so that we can copy. So in box 3 here, got another line, and so I will choose M to activate the Move tool, choose a starting point. Again, I like to start at a nice point that is known, so an end point or a midpoint. And then I click once, and then from here I can just click the Control key. I don't need to hold it down. I just click the Control key once, and now you'll see that my original object is still in place, but I am given a copy to start moving around. And so from here, same process, I can just type 6, enter, to move it 6 inches, or leave a copy in 6 inches. With me so far? Okay. And then I've got a little tip here. Remember when you activate a tool in SketchUp that the lower left corner tells you how to use that tool. So let's look at that. I'm going to expand my SketchUp screen here really quick. So if I were to go back to this, if I had selected my line and I activated the Move tool, it might be a little bit difficult for you to see up here on these screens, but you should see it in your own screen. Down here in the lower left, it tells me click to begin moving the pre-selected items. I can hit Control to cycle copy, and it gives you a little bit more tools that you can use that we haven't quite gotten to yet. So right now we're just focused on the Control for copy. And that'll be true for any tool in SketchUp. It usually kind of tries to help you out there in that bottom left corner to tell you what your next action should be or could be. And then kept going here. Additionally, you can pull up the instructor panel by clicking the window tab in the top ribbon, hover over default tray to display more options, and then choose show tray. And this is how we get that panel to pop up on the right side. That has the instructor panel. It brings up your materials, your tags, all that. So I'm going to go back to SketchUp, and just right along the top is a window tab. So you click that, hover over the first one, which is default tray, and then click show tray. And that's how you get all these panels over here on the right to show up. And down here we have something called the instructor, which again just gives you kind of some tips for how to use the tool that you have selected. Let's move on to box number 4, which is the push-pull tool. So we use the push-pull tool to extrude a surface. This will turn a 2-dimensional plane into a 3-dimensional object. So you select the push-pull tool, or you type P for the hotkey. And then you click on the surface that you would like to extrude. Move your cursor in the direction that you want the surface to extrude. And then from there you can either choose an endpoint or type the measurement, just like you can with the move and the copy tools. So here I am, box number 4. I'm going to extrude the rectangle in box 4 up by 1 foot. And so I will activate the push-pull tool by typing P. And then I will click on my surface that I want to extrude. I just click once. And then I can start pulling it up, and it'll start to drag upward. And I can type 1 foot, enter. And it should have extruded 1 foot up. So remember that the push-pull tool extrudes only in a direction that is perpendicular to your surface. So I wouldn't be able to, if I go back here, this surface can only move perpendicular to this plane right now. I can't get it to extrude at some weird angle. It'll only go perpendicular. So just, in this case, just up and down. All right, box number 5. For creating an object. This box is a little bit bigger because we're going to do a little bit more in this box. So you have several tools that can help you create the geometry that you are looking for. And these include the line tool, the rectangle tool, the circle tool, the arc tool, and more. Those are the 4 that we're really just going to focus on here. So I've also included the hotkeys inside the parentheses. So the line tool is L, the rectangle tool is R, circle is C, and arc, there are a couple different arcs, but just for your standard 2-point arc, that's just going to be A. So within box 5, we will create a line that is 6 inches long. So select the line tool or type L, choose a starting point, and type 6 and hit enter. So I'll click L to activate my line tool, which shows up as a little pencil. Click a starting point, and then I will type 6, enter, and it should have given me a 6-inch line. The next one is to create a rectangle that measures 3 inches along the green axis by 6 inches along the red axis. So we select the rectangle tool, or you can hit R on your keyboard. Choose a starting point and enter your dimensions separated by a comma. So I will choose a starting point here. And sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to know which number you're supposed to type first. Do I type the 3 first, or do I type the 6 first? Which one's going to give me around the green axis? And so I thought I had figured it out. I thought that SketchUp always started with the green axis, but then I tested it and I was wrong. So the best thing that I can come up with to figure out which way you're going is if I have my rectangle started here, I just clicked once and now I'm kind of freely able to move my mouse around. Along the bottom, it should show up in your bottom right-hand corner. It starts to tell you the dimensions that you are pulling your rectangle to. So as I'm moving my cursor around, you should see that the dimensions in the bottom are changing. And so what's helpful for me is I make one side of the rectangle really long, and you can see in the dimensions which one is doing that longer dimension. So in my box here, it says 1 1/8 inch by 7 inches. And so I know that my 7 inches is my longer one. And so from there, I know that I should keep my longer dimension for the last one, because that's currently my green axis. If I scroll out, you should be able to see the green axis is along my longer side. So I'm going to type 3, 6, enter, and now I have my rectangle that is 3 inches along the red axis by 6 inches along the green axis. Does that make sense to everybody, how I kind of determine which dimension to type first? I don't know if it's the best solution, but it's the one that I've got for you. Next, we're going to create a circle that is 6 inches in diameter. And so I will activate the circle tool by, you can either choose it from your toolbar, or I can hit C for circle. And your starting point will be the center of the circle, and SketchUp wants you to specify the radius, not the diameter. So I have my circle tool selected. I'll choose a starting point by just clicking once, and then I'll start to pull away from that center point, and now I can type in my radius, which should be 3 inches, so I'll type 3, enter. And now I've got a circle that should be 6 inches in diameter, or 3 inches radius. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to do in box 5 is to create an arc that is 6 inches in diameter. So, different from the circle tool, your starting point for the 2-point arc tool will actually be an end point of the arc. And then you'll specify the diameter, or the length between the 2 points, and then you'll be able to pull they call it a bulge, which is basically just the arch, or the arc. So, the 2-point arc tool, I can also type A to activate it, and it looks like a pencil with a little arc next to it once you have it selected. And so I'll choose a starting point just by clicking once. And then I can either move 6 inches, or I can type 6 inches here. So I'll type 6, enter. And now that's given me an end point 6 inches away. And then I start to pull in on one side of that line. You'll see I can go either direction. I can even go up on the blue axis, but I'm going to stick to just a flat arc here. And if I keep pulling, SketchUp will snap to a half circle for you. So in this instance, it's 3 inches. And again, along the bottom, it's telling me that my bulge is 3 inches, or the radius. So whichever way is easier for you, you can either find that snap of the half circle, or you can type 3, enter. And then you have an arc. How are we feeling? Okay. Wonderful. Box 6. The eraser tool. So the eraser tool, I think, you might learn something here, because I haven't gone over all of the things that the eraser tool can go before, or that it can do. So use the erase tool to delete objects. So you either select the eraser tool, or you can type E, that's the hotkey, so I'll just hit E to activate the eraser tool. And then you can click on the objects you would like to delete, so you can do it one by one, or you can just click and drag. So, show you here, I could just click once, and just the object that I was selecting has deleted. Or I can click and drag, and as long as I stay clicked on my left mouse, I can just start dragging around, and everything that I hit with the eraser tool is going to erase. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo so that all my lines are back. So, the eraser tool can do more than just erase. It can also hide objects, and it can also soften or smooth an edge. So to hide an object, you have the eraser tool activated, and you just hold the Shift key, and that will, you still have the same options. You can individually click, or you can still do your click and drag, and anything that you touch will then hide. It's not going to permanently delete, just hides. And then if you want to soften an edge, which we'll look at that here in a second, you hold the Control key. So, in box 6, use the eraser tool to erase the first line. So I have my eraser tool activated. I can just click on the line, and it erases. It's gone. Then use the eraser tool to hide the second line. So to hide, I still have the eraser tool activated. I'm going to hold down on the Shift key, and then I will click on my object, and it might look like it deleted, but it actually is just hidden. And so let's take a little detour here for a second to figure out how to get our hidden object back, just in case we accidentally hit it. So to do that, you will go up to the top and hit the View tab, and then you will make sure that Hidden Geometry and Hidden Objects is selected. It's got a check mark next to it, so I'm going to check Hidden Geometry and check Hidden Objects. And now, it's a little bit difficult to see, but my line came back just as a dashed line. So this tells me that it's still hidden, but it is there. It wasn't deleted, it was just hidden. And so, if I want to bring it back, I can just select it, right-click, and hit Unhide. And now it's back to normal. For your assignment, go ahead and just hide it with the eraser tool. Don't bring it back, because I want to know that you understood how to hide the line. So just leave it hidden. And then the third part of box 6, we're going to use the eraser tool to soften the common edge of these two planes. So this edge right here is the one that I want to soften. It's a little bit difficult to explain what softening means. It kind of just makes it look like that line is gone so that you don't have a hard edge anymore. It's going to just kind of waterfall into each other. So if I have my eraser tool, I will hold the Control key. And same thing, I can either just click once on my object, or I can click and drag if I want multiple objects. So I will just select this one here. And you'll see that the surface is just kind of smoothed out. And I still have my hidden objects selected, so I'm going to actually go turn those off. And you'll see that now it doesn't really look like we have an edge anymore. It all just kind of falls into each other. So that can be nice if you're modeling a nice piece of furniture, or maybe you have a waterfall countertop that you don't want a hard edge on. That can be helpful. And so again, you can bring it back if you accidentally softened it. Same thing for hidden. Go up to view and check the hidden geometry and check the hidden objects. And again, it's going to display as a dashed line. So I can select that line, right click, and hit unsoften. And that'll bring back my hard line. Again, for your exercise purposes, go ahead and leave it softened so that I see that you understand how to use the soften tool. So remember that the eraser tool only works on lines. It does not work on surfaces. So if I tried here, if I got my eraser tool and I just clicked on this surface, nothing's going to happen. It's not going to delete. It only works on lines. If you do want to delete a surface, you'll just have your select tool activated, and you can click on the surface, and you can either hit the delete key on your keyboard, or you can right click and choose erase. And so now I don't have a surface there anymore. You can also hide objects without using the eraser tool. It's also just a right click and finding it in your panel. Same thing with the soften tool. So I can, if I wanted to go back to my line that I'm supposed to hide, I can select it, right click, and hit hide, and that'll hide it. And then same thing for soften. I can select my line, right click, and soften. And then again, toggle on and off the hidden objects, hidden geometry, if I want to see them or not. So all that makes sense with the eraser tool? Okay. Hopefully most of this is not new information. I think the hide and soften might have been new, but hopefully a lot of this is just review, and we're building on the skills that we already have. So box number 7, we're going to offset a path. So you can use the offset tool to copy a path the same distance in all directions. So to offset the boundary lines of a surface, you would select the offset tool or type F for the hotkey. Click on the surface that you would like to offset the boundary of. And whenever you click on that surface, the lines that are going to be offset should highlight in red. And then you move your cursor either inside or outside of the surface, depending on which way you want it to go. And then you type the measurement that you'd like to offset the path by and hit enter. So let's test it out here in box 7. So we're going to offset the lines of the rectangle 1 inch inside of this original rectangle. So I'm going to activate my offset tool. I can either find it in my toolbar or I can type F. And if I just hover over this plane or this surface here, I haven't clicked anything yet, you can see that there's this red square that's kind of highlighting the edges that are going to be offset. So then I click once on the surface, and then I can either bring it inward or outward, depending which way I'd like it to go. In this instance, I want to bring it 1 inch inside. So I'll bring my cursor inside, and you can see that it should be offsetting all of your lines in the same distance in all directions. So I'm bringing it in. I can type 1 enter for 1 inch, and it should have offset it 1 inch in every direction. Yep, that's 1 inch. And you can also see that it left a copy of the lines. So the offset tool doesn't bring your original lines in for your offset, it's a copy. And you'll also see, since we have a new closed loop, we have a new rectangle here, that created two separate surfaces out of our original rectangle. And then you can also offset lines that are not in a closed loop. The only thing that's different here is you just need to select your lines prior to activating the offset tool. So in the first instance, I could just select the offset tool, find my rectangle, and start going from there. If I don't have a surface, I just have some open-ended lines, I have to select my lines first, and then I can activate offset, click once, and then bring it either inside or outside, depending which way you're wanting to go. In our exercise, we are offsetting the lines 1 inch outside of the original lines. So I'm going to start bringing my cursor outside of the lines, and I can type 1, enter, and that should have offset my lines by 1 inch in each direction. Moving right along to box 8. So we're going to jump back over here to the bottom left for box 8. We're going to use the rotate tool to rotate an object around or by a specific angle. So you select the object that you want to rotate, select the rotate tool or type Q for the hotkey, click to choose a starting point, and then you click in the direction that you want to specify as your 0 degrees, and then you can either type the angle that you want to rotate your object by, or you can just choose an endpoint. So SketchUp will start to snap for you. Let's take a look at that. So I'm going to select my line that I want to rotate, and I will hit Q to activate the rotate tool, and it brings up this protractor here. And so I first want to choose my starting point. So this is the point that your object is going to rotate about. So maybe I start at an end point. I click on the end point. I can start pulling my cursor to specify the 0 point or the 0 degree angle, and then click again. And then I can start to rotate it, and you'll see that the line is rotating about that initial end point that I chose first, my starting point. And so SketchUp will kind of snap a little bit for me. If I bring it closer to the protractor, it'll give me, I think, 15 degree increments. Or I can also just type in the angle that I want. Let's also look at, I could rotate around the midpoint of my line. So again, I'm going to choose the midpoint as my starting point. So I'll click once, specify where my 0 is, and click. And then if I start to rotate here, now you see that the line is rotating about the midpoint because I specified the midpoint first. So additionally, so you'll notice that if I'm just doing this, it's rotating my original object. But just like with our copy tool, our move and copy, I can click the control key. I just have to click it once. I don't have to hold it down. And now there's a plus sign next to my cursor. And now it's going to leave a copy of the rotated object. My original will stay in place. So, in box 8, you have 2 lines. The first line, we're going to rotate 90 degrees starting from the midpoint. So we're going to rotate around the midpoint. I'll select my line, hit Q to activate the rotate tool. Choose the midpoint as my starting point. So I'll click once on the midpoint. I will start a 0 degree line, And then from here, SketchUp should snap to 90 degrees, or you can go ahead and type in 90. So for angles, you just type in the angle, you don't need units. So I'll just type in 90, enter, and it's rotated 90 degrees. The second line, we're going to do the same thing, but we are going to copy the rotation rather than rotate the original line. So I'm going to select my second line here, hit Q for rotate, choose the midpoint as my starting point. You'll see SketchUp snaps to the midpoint for you. Click here, and then start a 0 degree line, and click again. And then I will hit the Control key to activate that copy. And then again, I can hit 90, enter, and now I have a copy of the line rotated 90 degrees. Box number 9, the Follow Me tool. Use the Follow Me tool to extrude a surface along a specified path. So remember we talked about with the Push-Pull tool, we can only extrude the surface perpendicular. But with the Follow Me tool, you have a lot more manipulation of which way you want your surface to extrude. So here we are going to select the Follow Me tool. This one actually doesn't have a hotkey. SketchUp didn't assign it a hotkey. You can assign your own hotkeys. Say you don't like Q for rotate. You can go in and change it. And we can look at that here in a second. But SketchUp does not have a default hotkey for the Follow Me tool. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the Follow Me tool from my toolbar. And then I am going to select my plane here, my surface. And then I'll stay close to my line here, and I don't have my mouse key pressed down. I am just hovering around the line, and it is pulling along that line. And you can just keep on going along the entire line, and then whenever you are ready to stop, I've made it all the way to the end point, I just click to finish. And I should have a nice three-dimensional object that's in the same path as that line. So one thing to keep in mind here with the Follow Me tool is that you need your path to already be drawn prior to using the Follow Me tool.
Still not getting that to work.
All right, let's move on to box number 10. And here we're going to mirror an object, mirror or flip. The two are interchangeable. So use the flip tool to mirror an object about a specified axis. So you select the object that you'd like to mirror, select the flip tool, and then click the axis that you'd like to mirror your object about. The default will be to flip around the center point of the object, but we'll look at a couple ways that we could maybe move that if we don't want it to flip along the center. So, in box 10, you have two groups here. They both look the exact same. On this first one, we're going to flip the group about the green axis. So I'm going to bring my SketchUp up a little bit more. So my green axis is right here. So this is the axis that I'm trying to flip about. So if I scroll back in here, I have my object selected, and then I will click on the flip tool, which again, I don't think it has a hotkey, so you might just have to go find it in your toolbar here. So I'll select the flip tool, and then these three axes should show up for you. We have green, red, and blue. So I want to do the green axis. So you can just start to hover over each of the planes, and the one that you are hovered over should turn a little more opaque. So I'm going to click on the green one, and you actually can't tell that flipped. So let's try the red one instead. I'm going to click on the red axis. There we go. Now you can tell that it flipped. So if you want to do the red axis as well, that works, so that we can tell that it's actually flipped. And you could just keep on clicking all day long, and it'll keep going back and forth. So we talked about, you'll see that it's all around the center point. All of my planes are intersecting at the center. I could, let's say that I don't want to flip along the center. I'm going to hover over the one that I want, and then I can just click and drag to start moving that axis. And so whenever you let go of the mouse, that's where it's going to flip. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that so we can see a little bit closer here. So I click and hold, and now I just have the red one, the red axis selected, and I can start dragging that around. Say I want to drag it over here. As soon as I let go of the mouse, boom, it flipped along this red line. Another thing that we could do, this is flipping our original object. Again, we can hit Control to copy. Seems like that's kind of a theme. We can always come back to that Control key to create a copy. So same process here. I'm going to click the Control key, and you'll see a little plus sign show up next to your cursor. That means that you are going to copy your object. And so with that copy activated, again, I could just click on the axis, and now I have a copy that was flipped along the center. So I think that was the second one. So the first one, we are just flipping the original, and then the second one, we are creating a copy of the flip. And if I messed up the axes, I apologize. Do the axis where you can actually tell that you flipped it. Maybe I should have created a better object that would have been able to recognize that it flipped in every direction, but I did this late last night. Okay. Box 11. The scale tool. Use the scale tool to resize an object. Select the object that you'd like to resize. Select the scale tool, or you can type S for the hotkey, and then you'll start to see grips form around the object. So let's move in here. Oh, let me bring my SketchUp back to the side. Okay. So it told me to select the object that I would like to resize. So I'll select my rectangle here. Select the scale tool or type S. So I hit S, and then you'll see these grips form. So if the object is two-dimensional, like our rectangle here, it's just a flat surface, the grips will appear at each corner, at each midpoint of each line, and then also at the center. Sorry, maybe not the center. We just have the corners and the midpoints. And so if you had a 3D object, so I'll scroll down to this cube here. If I select the cube and click S, we have grips again at each corner and each midpoint, but you'll see that it happens along each surface of the cube. Each surface has its corner grips, its midpoint grips, and its center grip. And so for scaling, you click on a grip to scale about the grip that is opposite from the one that you selected. And then you will type either a fraction or a decimal for your scale. So for instance, if you were doing 50%, you would type 0.5 or 1/2 and hit enter. And then again, we have the control option if we want to leave a copy rather than scaling the original object. So it says here in box 11, scale the rectangle by 50%. So here's my rectangle. I'm going to scale it by 50% about the center point. So select the rectangle, activate the select tool. I'm going to type S. And then you will, the control key is not a copy. The control key will scale about the center point. I misread here. So I'm not clicking on anything yet. I'm just simply hovering over the grips, and it's starting to tell me which direction that it would scale if I were to choose that grip. Or if I click the control key, now the center point grip has activated, and I can now scale about the center point. So let's look at how these two are different really quick. If I were to scale around the opposite grip, I can click once, and then that corner or midpoint or whichever grip I have selected will start to scale inward toward the opposite grip. So it's coming inward towards that grip. Or I could go outward, away from that grip. But that opposite grip is the one that's going to stay in place. If I do about the center point, so I click the control key and I click one of my grips, now the point that stays the same is the center point. So do we see how those two are different? Now all of my lines, all of my corners are being either scaled inward or scaled outward around the center point rather than the opposite grip. So, it says in box 11, scale the rectangle by 50%, so you can type 0.5 to make the rectangle half the size of the original, and we're going to do it about the center point. So select your rectangle, activate the scale tool, click the control key, just click once, so you don't need to hold it, and now it's activated the center point. And you can select, you'll see how it kind of changes depending on which grip you select. I'm going to grab the corner grip so it'll be a little bit more of a uniform scale. And I'll just type 0.5, enter. And now it should leave my rectangle half the size that it was before. And then let's move down to the cube here. So the second part of box 11 says to scale the cube by 150%. So you would type 1.5, and that'll make the rectangle 1.5 times bigger than the original cube. And this time we're going to scale about the lower right corner. So I'm going to select everything in my cube. Remember, we have our click and drag to select, or we can triple click, whichever way works easier for you. So I've got my cube selected. Activate the scale tool. And then we're going to scale about this lower right corner. So I want that lower right corner to stay in place, which means I need to select the grip that is opposite from that grip. So you can see if I just hover over my grips, it'll tell me which one is going opposite. So I can click once and then type 1.5, enter, and I should now have a cube that is 1.5 times bigger than the original, and my lower right corner is the one that stayed in place. How do we feel about the scale tool? We saw
Choose the opposite of what we want to scale it from. So I would choose the top left.
correct. Yes, opposite from the one that you want to stay in place. So if I wanted this lower left to stay in place, I would choose the upper right. We played with this tool a bit when we were making our table. This is how we tapered the table legs down. So it might have been a little bit harder for us to understand the scale tool since we were kind of wrapped up in trying to make a table and get the leg tapered just right. So just kind of breaking down the scale tool here to see how it works just in a more pure form. Okay. Box number 12. The tape measure tool. So skip over the box 5, that was the really long one, and come find box number 12. It should have 2 lines in it. So use the tape measure tool to measure the distance between objects. So you can select the tape measure tool or type T, that's the hotkey, and then you'll select the first point of the distance you'd like to measure, and then hover over the second point of the distance that you'd like to measure. So let's look at that here. We will activate the tape measure tool. I'm going to type T. And so I want to measure the distance between these 2 lines here. So I will click on an endpoint, and you can see that an arrow is starting to stretch across. I just clicked once. I'm not holding and dragging. So it starts to bring it across here. And then if I hover over my endpoint, the distance that I want to measure, it should show up for you in a little box near your cursor. So mine says 6 inches. And then also in the bottom where you have your little length, all your measurements, that should also say 6 inches for you. And then if you do, you can click your starting point and click your end point, and 6 inches will stay in that bottom distance box, but then it'll go away if I start to move around again. So sometimes I like to just hover over the second one so that I can see that measurement right next to my cursor. And then we know that the tape measurement tool also creates guidelines. And so to create a guideline that is specific in length, you would activate the tape measure tool, click a starting point, and then type the length that you want your guideline to be. So let's say I want a guideline that is 6 inches long. I would choose a starting point, so just click once, start to bring it in the direction that you want your guideline to be, and then I'll hit 6, enter, and I should be left with just this dotted line that is 6 inches long. It's in the same direction that I was pulling my cursor. Alternatively, you can create a guideline that is parallel to an existing line. So with the tape measurement tool, you're going to click the line that you want your guideline to be parallel to, and then type the distance away from that guideline or from that original line that you want it to be. So if we look at what we're supposed to do here in box 12, it says measure the distance between the 2 lines in box 12 We did that. We found out it was 6 inches. And then create a guideline that same distance to the right of the second line. So I want to create a guideline that is parallel to this line here, and it's going to be 6 inches away from that line. So whenever I created this first guideline, I just chose a specific point and then typed in my measurement to create just a line that's that single distance, that single line. If I want to create a guideline parallel to an existing line, I need to click on the edge of a line. You can click anywhere on your line. Click once, and then start to pull away from that line, and it should bring you this guideline that starts to be parallel to that line. And from here I can type 6, enter, and now I'm left with this nice long guideline parallel to that original line. Let's move on to box number 13. This is a refresh on tags, or also known as layers. If you're used to AutoCAD, you're probably going to call them layers. So you can use tags to organize your model. With the default tray open, so this is the tray that we opened earlier to find the instructor panel, this tray also has the tags panel. So I have this open. Again, if you forgot how to open that, we went to Window, Default Tray, and then this should say Show Tray if it's not already there. Mine says Hide Tray. That would just mean that I would take that tray back away, but that's where you would find that. And then here's my tag panel here, this one called Tags. You can also, you've got a lot of different panels here. You can just click on the name of the panel to kind of drop that down. And then you can also shorten and expand by just grabbing the bottom, and you can pull it up or drag it down if you'd like to see more or less. So you can create a new tag by clicking the plus sign in your tags panel. So I'll click the plus sign, and it's asking me to name my new tag. And so if you look a little bit further down, box 13, we are creating a new tag called Intro to SketchUp. So I hit the plus sign to create a new tag. I can name it Intro to SketchUp and hit enter. And then you can toggle on and off the visibility of that tag by clicking on this little eyeball here on the left. So SketchUp defaults with one tag, and it's called untagged. So everything that I've created so far should have been on that one tag since it was the only tag available. So if I click that eyeball, oh, I forgot again, you can't hide the current tag. So I think we learned this last week. There's always an active tag. So whichever one is active, anything new that you start to model is going to be on that active tag. So I can switch my active tag. The one with the pencil on the far right is the one that is indicated as the active tag. So I can just click on the right side of my new tag, and the pencil will move down to it. So now Intro to SketchUp is my active tag. So now I should be able to go click that eyeball, and everything disappeared because everything is on that tag that's called untagged. And then I can click the eyeball again and bring everything back. So back to Canvas here. We went through a little bit of that. So then we also need to know how to change the tag of objects that are already existing, because everything here I've already modeled on the untagged tag, but my assignment wants me to change the tag of the lines in box 13 from untagged to the Intro to SketchUp tag. So to do that, I still have my default tray pulled open here, and you'll see that the very first one is called Entity Info. That's going to give you information about whatever object you have selected. So if I select my two lines that are here in box 13, now the Entity Info is giving me some information. It tells me that I have two edges selected. It tells me what tag those are on, so right now it's untagged. And then I've got a couple other options here. It gives me the total length of my lines. I could soften my lines here, so it gives you a couple of different options, but we're really just looking at the tag here right now. So again, they're on untagged, but you can just use the little drop down and change it to the Intro to SketchUp tag. So now, if I were to go and hide or click the eyeball for my Intro to SketchUp tag, those two lines should disappear because they're now on that tag. And then I click the eyeball again, and they're back on.
So it's a little icon with a tag on it right here. Is that right?
What's that?
Does not affiliate
I know.
what they are.
It's dumb.
Layered. Every other program is layered.
Exactly.
And a layer
And it
is
used to be
exactly
layered,
what
didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they just recently changed it to tags. Who knows? Alright, box 14. We've made it to our final box. Groups and components. So we've learned about groups and components before, so hopefully this one's a little refresher for you. You can create groups and components in SketchUp to isolate specific geometry. This can be beneficial if you're going to create multiple copies of an object, or we also talked about stickiness, which is the tendency of adjacent objects to kind of connect to each other, stick to each other, and they all want to move together. So if I go to my SketchUp screen here, we can kind of look at what that means by stickiness. I'm just going to come over here to some blank space. And I'm just going to start creating some things. Oh, I made a really weird object. So if I wanted to just move this one plane, I'll double click on my surface to highlight the surface and the bounding lines of that. If I just wanted to move it away from this other surface, if I activate the Move tool, it's really hard for me to do that because everything is kind of stuck together and SketchUp is trying to move everything that is connected to that surface. And so creating groups can be really helpful to kind of isolate that specific geometry so that you can then move it on its own. So to create a group, you would select the objects that you want in your group. So I have my surface and the lines selected here. Right click and hit Make Group. And I think I might have had, let's see if I have something in here. Oh, nope, that's what I wanted. Okay. So now I have my group made, and I can still edit my group. I just can double click into the group, or you can right click and hit Edit Group, and it'll take you into the edit mode. And then you can tell that you're in the edit mode because everything else kind of grays out a bit, and you have this little dashed bounding box around your group. So that can kind of be an indicator that you're in an edit mode. So now that I have a group created, if I try to do the same thing I tried to do earlier, I just want to move these objects without affecting this other surface over here. Activate my Move tool. And then now I can move it away from that other plane because it's now acting as its own entity. It's its own group. It's no longer affiliated with that other surface. So groups can be a nice way to kind of avoid stickiness. We talked about how to create a group, and then components are similar. We've talked about this before. So it'll seem similar. The process will seem similar. So let's say I want to do this other surface. I'm going to make it a component instead of a group. So I've selected my surface and my lines, right click, and this time hit Make Component. And then this little dialog box comes up. It wants you to name it in the definition box. So right now it's just the default name is component 1, but maybe I want to name it something different. Just name it surface. And then we haven't gotten too much into any of these extra options. The only other thing that we want to make sure is that we have checked this bottom box which says replace the selection with the component. What that means is that it's going to take everything you have selected and it's going to make the component out of it. If you don't select that box, the component will still be made, but it's not going to turn your selected objects into that component. It's a little strange. So I just always make sure that I've got that checked. And then hit create. And it looks the same as groups do. It's got the bounding box around it. So I'll jump back over to Canvas here. We talked about how you can edit a group or a component by double-clicking the group or the component. Okay, bye. Or you can right-click and choose Edit Group or Edit Component. You can ungroup your groups and components. So to do that, you just select the group. You don't want to double-click into it. We're not in edit mode. We're just simply clicking on the object. Right-click and hit Explode. And now everything is back to being in kind of your main model space. And you can do that with components as well. You can right-click and hit Explode. So then, you can make copies of both groups and components. But here's where groups and components really start to differ. If you edit a copy of a group, the original group is not going to be affected. It's going to stay the same. Your copy will start to change with all the changes that you're doing, but your original group is not going to change. Components, on the other hand, if you copy a component and then you start to edit that new component, the original component is also going to change. So they're still tied to each other. Groups will no longer be associated with each other if you start copying, but components will. So, but there's also a little bit of a workaround for that. So let's first, before we get to the workaround, let's just take a look at that. So again, I'm going to kind of head out into my open model space here. Just going to quickly create a cube. And I'm going to select my cube and hit Make Group. If I copy that group, I've got my Move tool activated and Control for copy. Maybe I'll copy it over here. If I double click into my new copy, I can start editing things, moving things all around within my group, but you see that that first one is staying the same. Nothing's happening to it. So these groups are no longer associated with each other. I can bring it out here, do whatever I want to this, and that first one has stayed the same. Components, on the other hand, let's do the same thing. I'll create my quick little cube here. And instead of a group, I'll make component. Just going to call it a cube. Create. And then I'm going to create a copy. So activate the Move tool, hit Control to copy. So now I have components, if I double click into my copy and I start making changes, the original is also changing with my copy. Same thing if I edited the original and I started making changes to the original, all the copies are changing. So components are still tied to each other. Groups are not. So the workaround, let's say you have a bunch of the same component, but you now have one that you want to make slightly different without affecting the rest. So let's make another copy of our component here. And right now, if I were to go in here, both the original and my first copy are going to change. But if I just click on my component, I'm not in edit mode, I just click on the component, right click, and hit make unique, it's going to create a unique instance of that component. And then now I can go in here and start editing, and it's no longer tied to the original and the first copy. Now it's its own component. Does that make sense to everyone?
How did you get to make unique?
Yeah.
Right click.
So if you have your copy of your component made, I'm still in like the main model space. I'm not editing the component. So I'm just clicking once and then right click, hit make unique, and now it's its own thing. There's not really sometimes I wish a dialog box would come up that says, hey, you've made a unique component, what would you like to name it, or something like that. SketchUp doesn't do that. So once you hit make unique, it has created a new component. And so actually it did change the name. So my original, I had just named cube, and then whenever I hit make unique, it started with cube number 1, and then I made another one unique, and now it's cube number 2. So it does give you a new name for,
So to speak.
yeah,
By adding one.
correct, yeah. And then you can always go back in, if I've got that other component selected, I can come in here and change the name. If I don't want it to be cube number 2, I could change it to whatever I wanted up here in my entity info, but that's just kind of SketchUp's default, is to put a number 1, number 2, so on and so forth after. So let's take a look at the actual box 14 assignment. It's your very last box. It says to make a group of the first cube. So right now this is not grouped. So if we remember our kind of techniques for selecting, I can either click and drag and grab everything, or I can triple click to grab everything that is touching each other. And then I'll right click and hit make group. And now I have a group. And you'll see up here in your entity info, it tells you that it's a solid group and that there's only one in the model. And then the second part of box 14 is to make a component of the second cube and name it cube 1. So let's go ahead and do that part real quick. I'll select everything that's part of my cube, right click, and hit make component. My dialog box is going to come up, and in the definition box, I'll name it cube 1. Hit create. And now my entity info tells me that it's a component rather than a group. And again, there's one in the model. So then we're going to copy cube 1 twice. So activate your move tool, hit control for copy, and then just make 2 copies. 1, 2. You'll notice that you have to hit the control key again to copy that second one. It doesn't stay activated, so you're going to have to keep hitting the control key each time you want to make a copy. So then my directions tell me to keep the first copy, this one here, keep it as cube number 1. But the second copy that we created here, we are going to make unique. So we will select our second copy, right click, and make unique. And so now you'll see up here in the entity info that our definition is now cube 1, number 1. You can change it if you like up here in the definition box. You can change it to just cube number 2. And now that's called cube 2. And now you can go ahead and edit this unique copy however you'd like. And you'll know you did it right if the first 2 don't change. If the first 2 change, we didn't get that make unique quite right. So that'll take us to the end of the assignment. You'll complete each of the 14 boxes and then save and upload to the assignment.